Welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. A lot on the agenda this week, and as always, but very interesting. There's a heated exchange between Rand Paul and Dr. Fauci that really heated up, and he became, Dr. Fauci, a little unnerved by it.
Unnerved is a polite way to put it. I would say he became
I'm
unhinged.
a polite guy.
Yeah.
What's that? Say that again. I'm sorry.
I would say he became unhinged. He just completely lost his temper in the Senate hearing. The fact of the matter is, and most people forget about this, but Rand Paul is a doctor.
Yeah. No, it's not Billy Bob. Yeah. He's a doctor, as much of a doctor, and maybe more so than Dr. Fauci. He's a medical doctor.
And so Dr. Rand Paul brought out medical details that contradicted what Fauci has been saying and accused Fauci of lying to the American people. And Fauci lost his temper and started yelling at Rand Paul that he's the one who's lying. And it really did resemble a schoolyard spat between the two of them.
No, it really did. I think Fauci he was the Pope Fauci. I think that's starting to wane. I think he also was, he's in his 80s. I think it was his moment of fame and fortune. He was, Elvis and Mick Jagger, wrapped up together. And he was not criticized. He was holier than thou. He loved being in the limelight. He did everything he could to undermine Trump, sometimes rightfully, many times for his own agenda. And he cannot take any criticism because he's a career-long bureaucrat, essentially. Am I not correct?
You are absolutely correct. And unfortunately, as time goes on and more research is done, it turns out that Fauci was wrong about quite a bit, some of which Fauci has actively pushed against, including the fact that the virus started in that Wuhan lab, because Fauci was apparently part of the committee that funded that lab, and he should have known that this was where it came from. And fought that.
Go ahead.
He fought that all along. He tried to discredit it, and now it's turning out to be the likely source.
So let me ask you, Dr. Lopkin, couldn't you make the case? I'm now really watching a lot of Perry Masons. I'm sure you're too young for that. But anyway, could it be said that he put his own agenda, his own career, his own credibility ahead of the American public? If he was more upfront, maybe other things could have happened.
Yes, I think if he had come clean about what was going on at the Wuhan lab earlier, we would have known more. We would have had more information. We could have fought COVID much more effectively. But by hiding that, because he didn't want it to come out that they had been funding it, we ended up with a much worse situation.
Yes, I think that's quite interesting to say the least. It also is interesting that he's still in mainstream media. He's still embraced, although they're not hugging him as tightly as they used to. He was on Rachel Maddow, and he basically had the unbelievable comment, "To be against me," meaning him, is going against science. Talk about arrogance. My God.
Yeah, and as it turns out, the science does not back him up.
Yeah, but if
you really want to follow science, you don't follow personalities. And that's what Fauci became, very much in the same way Andrew Cuomo did.
Great comparison, Dr. Lopkin. Yes, I remember during the dark days of COVID, the initial phases, I remember talking to people and they would say, "Oh, you got to go. It's a Cuomo update." Like he was the rock star. And then as time goes on and more is uncovered, he's an egotist that is essentially incompetent and probably responsible for many people dying. Am I not correct?
Yes, I mean he's definitely responsible for a lot of people dying. That much has been established, without a doubt. But both Fauci and Cuomo got the limelight, did not want to give up the limelight, and put their own egos above the good of the American people. And what's really ironic about it is that both of them had accused Trump of doing the same thing.
Oh, exactly. That's really the irony behind the whole thing. Yes, and always the Democrats or liberals always say that science matters as long as it's on their side.
Right.
As soon as it goes against them, then that's hearsay. That's heresy. That's only an idiot would say that. But,
exactly.
Very interesting. So then we move on to the situation in Cuba, and for the first time, the Biden administration was very firm with the fact that they don't want any Cuban refugees coming to American shores. Very, very, very stern warning. How is that? When they're basically having an open border policy with other parts, obviously in the southern border. What's the problem with Cubans? Could you explain that to me, Dr. Lopkin?
Well, it's actually very simple. The Cubans are fleeing socialism, and that they are fleeing the result of exactly what the far left wants to bring here. So if the Cubans come here, there is no way they are going to be supporting Democrats, because as the Democrats move further to the left, Cubans, and we've already seen this in Florida, the Cuban population has been very staunch in their support for the Republican Party because the Democrats are trying to do what Cuba has already done. So
yes, you see that with other immigrants. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so of course they don't want Cubans coming here because Cubans are going to tell everybody, no, that's a bad policy. That's why we fled. We can't do that.
Yes, very ironic and also disturbing to some degree. Again, but it doesn't surprise me because many liberal Democrats used to be. So, when there was a crisis, the left and the right would join together in America. I think that's no longer the case. I think the Democratic Party is more focused on gaining power than an American agenda. They see in some ways their possibilities waning, in other ways golden opportunities. So, and they've portrayed that or demonstrated that certainly during the Biden administration. Would you agree with that, Dr. Lopkin?
Absolutely. And the left is capitalizing on any crisis they can. And it came out a few days ago, the Black Lives Matter movement came out in support of the Cuban government.
Yes, I heard that.
And Mark Rubio, who, as most people know, his father was a Cuban immigrant. He was in jail because of Castro. His grandfather was in jail because of Batista. They fled Cuba to come here. So Mark Rubio has been following all of this very carefully. And Rubio announced that if Black Lives Matter is such a staunch supporter of the Cuban government, he is more than happy to help them relocate there.
No, I think, the whole Black Lives Matter movement, obviously the concept is right on because I think there has been abuse in terms of African Americans being treated disproportionately, and certainly historically, in the justice system. And I think it's beyond black and white. I think it's even more of an issue of affluent, non-affluent. We saw that with the Cosby case. But it really is interesting how many white affluent liberals, they put their Black Lives Matter sign on their lawns and have no idea what the organization is about in any way. Correct?
Oh, that's very true. Black Lives Matter has been used simultaneously for the movement and an organization. And the movement of Black Lives Matter was to bring attention to the inequalities that were being faced in the justice system. The organization Black Lives Matter has nothing to do with that. It's a left-wing radical organization that is pushing socialism, and they don't really care what goes on in the justice system. They just want the end of capitalism.
Well, no. The end of capitalism for you and I. For the leader, she just bought her third house, just like Bernie, our buddy Bernie. Do as I say, not as I do. A liberal edict. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah,
let's move on to the Delta. How about the Delta variant with the vaccine? I think that's another very interesting situation and alarming, because two things that alarm me is we have an open border in our southern border is open, and there was a 900% increase in new COVID cases, many of this variant.
Yes. They found a 900% increase in COVID cases in people coming across the border and spreading it to Border Patrol and the people that work down there.
Okay, let me ask you a question. If this was Trump, Cuomo, whatever, all the usual suspects, the geniuses on CNN, would it be, is a rhetorical question, Doctor, would it be wall-to-wall coverage, the incompetency of letting people in during a pandemic?
Oh, absolutely. They would be hammering Trump on this. How can you be letting all of these people in that have COVID and then just releasing them into the general population? Because remember, a lot of these folks, they're not being held anymore. They're just being let go.
Oh, yeah, no question about it.
So these people that have tested positive, they're not being quarantined necessarily. They're free to spread it. And you have that at the border. We've had a super spreader event. Now the White House refuses to call it a super spreader event. Every Trump rally during the election, they called a super spreader event. But the Texas Democrats that fled Texas, so they didn't have to vote on voter security, they have been spreading COVID. So far, 6 of their members have been tested and found to have COVID. They have spread it to Nancy Pelosi's staff. They have spread it to the White House staff. And yet they're not talking about that. That's not a super spreader event.
That's not a super spreader event. Go ahead.
As the Democrats are so fond of saying, we have to follow the science. So I do want to bring up the scientific facts that we know about the Delta variant. And this is 3 very important facts. Number 1, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines have been found to be effective against the Delta variant. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine has not. So if you got a vaccine with 2 shots, you're fine. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine was the 1 shot. That's less effective against the Delta variant. The second fact,
and that's supported by evidence, correct, Dr. Lopkin?
Yes, these are all supported by scientific studies. The second thing we know about the Delta variant, it is much more contagious than the original coronavirus strain. However, the third thing we know is that it is not nearly as deadly as the original coronavirus strain. In fact, scientists are now postulating that the Delta variant is going to become an annual event like the flu, and it's only going to be as dangerous as the flu as long as you get vaccinated.
Interesting. Well, the other part that troubles me, Dr. Lopkin, is will people not think about, harken back to Trump with all his idiosyncrasies? And let's face it, the guy has some real issues without any doubt. But are you confident, Dr. Lopkin, if we had another variant, the XL7 variant, in Joe Biden's ability to handle a pandemic crisis, along with Kamala?
I'm not comfortable with Joe Biden's ability to handle feeding himself, never mind having an actual crisis. We're already seeing LA bringing back mask mandates, and they're talking about bringing back lockdowns in California. And again, this is the left overreacting because, again, there are scientific facts that we know that I've just gone through, and isolating everybody is the worst thing you can do because this is not as serious a strain. It's more important that our immune systems be exposed to it and that we do achieve herd immunity.
Yeah, I think it's also something that has to be looked at. And, it's been a year and a half since the initial onslaught of COVID. There are many people that I know, and including myself. I mean, I was not the happiest camper in the world. I mean, it had significant impacts, especially on young people. The lockdown, it's not without consequences, correct, Dr. Lopkin?
No, it's definitely not without consequences. There were huge economic consequences. There were huge social consequences.
And
there were huge mental health consequences. So, yes, in a lot of ways, the prevention was much worse than the disease. And I've actually heard a number of pundits talk about the fact that if this happens again, the American people do not have it in them to do another lockdown.
Said it much more eloquently than I did. That's really the key, Doctor. You mean we did it once, we barely got through it. It's enough is enough. Am I correct? I mean,
yes,
you can't do it forever.
Yeah, no, most people, if the leaders say we have to lock down, people will revolt. They will say, forget it. They will go out. A lot of them will not wear masks again. A lot of them are not going to shut down their businesses again. And you're talking about something on the level of a full-scale revolt, possibly if it turned violent on the level of the Black Lives Matter riots, because people cannot be locked down again. They just don't have it in them anymore.
I agree, but isn't there, for the final thought, could there be more of of an ulterior motive on the left? I mean, the left they used COVID to some degree to their advantage. It showed how much they could control society. I think they'll miss that control, and at any opportunity, won't they enjoy bringing it back?
Oh yes,
not the virus itself. I'm not saying
no. The Democrats
exercising control.
Yes, the Democrats want any opportunity to show people that you are dependent on the government. You must give us emergency powers. You must turn your lives over to us. And the fact of the matter is, that's one of the reasons they don't want more Cubans coming here. Because if you take a look at the Cuban population in the United States, this is a group of people that literally came here with nothing. Many of them came on rafts, not even being able to carry anything. And you have a very successful population of Cuban business owners, of Cuban workers. These are folks that showed they could survive with nothing and make it on their own. And
surprise, they didn't need big government, did they?
Right. They didn't need big government. They didn't use big government.
Could it be, Dr. Lopkin, that maybe they could have taken advantage of some programs, but given the history that they experienced, they embraced the old American ideal of bringing yourself up by the bootstraps, being self-directed. They didn't want government, not all of them, but I think many of them said, no, I'll do them on my own. I know what government means. Nothing comes for nothing, Dr. Lopkin. When government gives you something, there's a price to pay, isn't there?
Yes, there is. There's always a price to pay. Nothing in this world is free. And when the government says they're going to give you money, that money has to come from somewhere. And usually it ends up coming back from your own pocket, because anytime they put in a tax hike, new fee, whatever they want to call it. They'll tell you it's only going to affect the rich. And that's never historically been the case. It always trickles down, and the group that gets hit the hardest is the middle class.
One final thought that I think is kind of amusing. It might start out the rich, but it's funny how the definition of rich changes as these bills get older and older, and like you said, all of a sudden rich is $75,000 a year.
All right. What can be defined as rich in Arkansas is below the poverty level in New York City. So these things never work out. And if you'll remember, it was only a few years ago that I think it went into the Bush and possibly the Obama administrations. They had to redefine the alternative minimum tax because that was there to make sure the rich paid their fair share. And who was getting hit with it? The middle class.
Interesting. Well, Dr. Lopkin, that concludes another edition of Carnivore Bites. We've been expanding over the last couple of weeks. We're available. We're almost all Stellar podcasts are available, aren't we?
Yeah. You can find us at xvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, and wherever you find podcasts.
Thank you, Dr. Lopkin. Thank our listeners. Take care.
We'll see you next week.